So welcome back to In the Spotlight. Jeannie and Kathleen here. And on the phone with us right now is Bob Grogan. He is the former DuPage County auditor who is still vying for his seat in a very contentious sort of court dealing that dealt him a really good thing, and that he got a final recount decision. The judge looked at all the evidence that came out of that election, first of all being 1,626 more ballots cast than voters that we have names for on the voter roll.
How does that happen?
Only in Illinois, right. But I don't know. So anyway, he basically got a determination by the judge maybe about a month ago saying that a full recount's warranted. However, the county clerk who runs the election system here in DuPage came up with an outrageous number of $300,000 that Bob and his campaign would have to put up in order to fund that recount.
Which
they
is
went
outrageous.
right back into court. Right back into court. And so Bob is here on the line because, in about 10 days, he has to come up with $60,000. Now the number got cut down to $60,000 in order for this recount to go forward. So Bob, welcome to In the Spotlight. Could you tell us any more? Tell us where you're at with everything and give us a little more detail about what happened and why the judge decided to knock down that figure from 300 to 60,000.
Sure. Even a casual observer's, to me, it's outrageous anyway that when the government gets it wrong the first time and the judge says the government got it wrong the first time, that you still have to have a private party pay for, to get it right the second time. But this is Illinois. It's the way they do it. But the judge and everybody else thought when the clerk, picked a $300,000 number for the cost to a private individual to get it right the second time, that it was outrageous. It just didn't make any sense. So the judge came back and ruled that it was just under 60,000 would be more reasonable according to Illinois laws.
Why, it seems like there's either evidence to pursue a recount and that something went wrong on the state side, or there isn't. And the judge found that there was reason to pursue a recount. So why do you end up paying a partial payment?
I think it's just, to defend, the system to some extent. I think it's a holdover from a bygone era. It used to be, before there was a lot more of this electronic stuff, which has narrowed the number of mistakes, right? You're no longer hand counting things. You're not going to just mistabulate because you didn't carry the one.
Right.
I think back, 30 years ago, a recount could move things. You could make a case for a recount if you were like 5% off, not 5 votes off. Right. So I think it's a holdover from that bygone day when people would just do it just to take a chance, even though they had no shot at it. Whereas in my instance, it's different because what separates me from the gentleman who won on 14 days after the election when they finally finished counting the ballots is 0.02%. And, it's such a small number that the judge, after we had found so many significant findings that literally would have overturned the election, but we haven't looked at everything yet, but the stuff that we did find would have overturned, the judge, in his opinion, said, functionally, this is a tied race. And, he recognized that. And I think that, the old law basically wanted somebody to have some skin in the game, that they just didn't do, spurious, recounts just to mess with other people.
Sure,
that's obviously not my case.
Yeah, I see.
I think most of us can understand that. But
I'm a skinflint for the taxpayers, so you're always wanting the taxpayers to pay less, but the taxpayers do have to pay for the normal functions of government. So there's a yin and a yang to it.
Well, there sure is. But in this case, the court decided that a final recount or a full recount was in order, at which point it does seem that it'd be imperative that the taxpayers pay for that full recount, because you would have never gotten that determination had you not even been close. And you've already paid for the court proceedings prior to this as well. Yeah. So you've already made it past all those hurdles. You've already proved up that there was a number of illegally casted votes that were actually counted improperly. So it's not like you didn't have to prove your case up before this, and now they're going to make you fine $60,000 in order to pay for the full recount. I still find it a little bit unbelievable because it gives a chilling effect to anybody else who may want to wander down this path in the future.
Trust me, I feel the same way. There's actually a recount effort going on in Cook County. It's about the sub-circuit for a judge race. and it's about half the population of DuPage, and Cook County is asking for $600,000 to do that after a judge has ordered that recount. An independent judge has ordered that recount. So hey, look, the other side is really good at using power to keep power. They don't want you to look behind the curtain. And the dirty little secret is any system that has 500,000 inputs is going to have an error rate, right? Yep. And that's getting away from motive. Is this on purpose or is it on accident, right? There is just going to be some things that are going to be wrong when you have 500,000 inputs, and that's the ballots, right? Let alone the fact that it was during a pandemic and they passed one-time election laws, just to advantage the Democrats just this cycle. So you have a lot of these things going on, but it just so happens mine was so razor thin that any of the amount of those mistakes are going to change things. But what's interesting is the judge actually has already ruled on certain kinds of mistakes that the totals will, by definition, will be changing. The judge has announced, has ruled that the total number of votes will change for both me and my opponent. And then the question ends up being is how does that balance out, right? Are more of these errors or these issues on his votes or on my votes? So the numbers will change.
So this, for example, this would be that during the partial recount, there were a number of ballots that did not have judges' initials. And so the judge probably said, okay, any ballot going forward that is found without a judge's initials, I'm already ruling that is an illegally cast ballot and it will not count. Is that the type of thing that you're speaking of?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. And then there also, we have very high confidence. We saw, so there was a huge number of vote by mail ballots cast, right? I mean, unprecedented. It went from something like 30,000 the prior election to 160 something thousand, this election. So there's a massive uptick in vote by mail stuff. So that, the judges, and they're bipartisan judges and they're trying to do their job, but, mistakes can be made there. We found at least, and we only looked at maybe 10% of the envelopes, we found at least like 6 or 7 envelopes that had a postmark after the election. So Illinois already has a very liberal vote by mail thing that you actually can vote, you can drop it in the mailbox all the way up through election day. Other states it has to be delivered, to the clerk by election day and things like that. But so we found a handful of votes where the ballot, empty envelopes that were postmarked after election day with no ballot inside them. So that means they're in there. So those two, now you can't link it up to an actual ballot, but you can still adjust, and there are still remedies that you can do that will change the totals because there are illegally accepted vote by mail ballots.
Who is gonna, after you've gone through all of this, who will run the recount? Who oversees it?
So what happened? The way it works, my understanding is, and this is another thing where we had to fight back and forth on the rules and get some extra, rulings from the court, and fortunately they favored us every time because we were making good arguments. What happens is, once we schedule this, once I've raised the money, which I have to do by the last Friday of the month, once we do that, we'll set a date, and I have to come in with 30 volunteers for like 3 weeks. The other side does the same, and then we're going to have 60 election judges, 30 of each party, and at 30 different tables in a big room, and you're going to look at every ballot individually, and I object, he objects, the clerk objects, whatever, and then we make different piles, and eventually those ballots then go in front of the judge to then rule on the different kinds of objections.
Wow.
So it is not simple.
Wow.
And that's why there was a downstate sheriff race. Took 2.5 years to get through it.
That's amazing.
And that one just recently settled, and that one went from a Democratic win, and it was overturned, and the Republican ended up winning in the end. I jokingly, respectfully joke that the difference between me and President Trump is I don't know if I won, right? Because I'm an auditor. Till I see all the evidence in front of me, I don't know what the results of my tests are, right, of my observations. And so I look at things, but the judge is not wrong that it's really a 50-50, depends on what you're finding, but it's 50-50 on the outcome. But there is 100% knowing that the numbers are going to change. It's just whether they change enough for me or they could potentially even go the other way. So that's what we're fighting for. If you don't mind if I give a plug.
No, we want you to give a plug. I was just on your GoFundMe site where people can donate directly to Bob's account in order to raise the money, the $60,000 necessary. It seems to be ticking up every time I check it, but we need it to tick up dramatically, immediately. As soon as you hear this, I want you to go to his GoFundMe site. Tell us about that, Bob.
Sure. So you can go to GoFundMe, just search Grogan, that's Grogan, Recount, and it'll pop right there. You can also go directly to my webpage, which is votegrogan.com. You can donate that way. There's also, if you're old school, you don't trust the internet, which I don't blame you sometimes. You can always, if there's information on both of those sites to be able to show you how to do the old-fashioned mail a check. My kids don't even get checks with their checking account, right? But the people I think that truly understand democracy and truly understand, I think that they still have a checkbook in their purse or in their wallet, right? But I do need help. I cannot fund this out of my own pocket. We've already paid $40,000 plus in legal fees. Oh my gosh. But here's the incentive is we just need to get it right. And right. I never declared victory. I didn't. I'm not one of those that is pie in the sky, conspiratorial. But I just know that what we don't know is whether I did lose, right? And so there's too many unknowns. We owe it to our system and to democracy. And I guess there's an extra benefit that I guess we haven't talked about is nowhere else in that cycle is there a full recount, right? That's this far along, that we can actually find out what are the kinds of errors, right? We found a couple kinds of errors already. We get to go and say, wait a minute, other things might be wrong, but in a full recount, we can find those things.
No, and this is a really important point, because when they're making legislation about election rules down in Springfield, they always want to poo-poo any Republican comment saying, well, that just adds a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity to do it wrong here if you don't do this. And it also, and so your recount will prove up some of those loopholes, some of those lapses, some of the places where, you've got to have more eyes on a particular procedure, or you've got to have tighter restrictions on vote by mail procedures. So this is the opportunity for every Illinoisan, honestly, to get involved in a recount that will actually, I think, set precedents in the future and be a case study about what can go wrong with an election. Because, and I appreciate it. I want to give a shout out to all the donors that I've reached out to that have that donated to your campaign. I'm seeing names that I absolutely recognize from around the state that have gone to your GoFundMe. So everybody, if you're listening to this, you still have time to go to his GoFundMe site, type in Grogan, Grogan, and donate to Bob's recount efforts.
We will post it on our social media until you hit the 60,000 mark.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And the reason you recognize those names, Jeannie, is because people who get it and care are your supporters, and they understand that democracy is paid both, those people who serve like you did, and as well as people who just step up and volunteer or write checks, and it doesn't come free. There's a lot of ways we have to pay for democracy, and this is just another way.
Well, thanks for being a fighter, Bob. I really appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Have a great day.
Okay. Right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.